Greatest thing ever done, my parents actually got soup into the movies one time. Yeah, because they started with candy and Cokes, then they kind of amped it up to like sandwiches and soda, and then my dad got bored with that, and they literally went somewhere and got takeout soup and put it in there. Not that they wanted soup, they just wanted to show the movie theaters that you can't hold me down.
I took a full bag of potato chips and like a 1 liter of Dr. Pepper, like 3 heads of candy.
Alright, now you show them. Alright, now look. This map is of the Iraq War. And what we're going to be talking about right now is not the Iraq War, but it's the best map that I can show we're talking about. Iran bordered the Soviet Union, right? So if you're America, what is your goal if Iran borders?
Strong ally.
You want it to be a strong ally. They were ruled by a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh is spelled Mousssadegh.
Alright then. Yeah.
Mohammad Mossadegh was a nationalist leader. He was no particular friend of the United States. But there was a dissident who had a claim to the power seat in Iran called the Shah of Iran. And he was a brutal dude, but was pro-American. So this is going to be one of America's first times to use the CIA to influence power in another country. So in 1953, the United States CIA engineered what we call a coup, a C-O-U-P, right, a coup d'etat. We engineered a coup. Now that doesn't mean our military went in and shired by and put the Shah in. What that means is the CIA, in every country, a lot of unstable countries, there are people who want change, right? So if there are a lot of people who want change and don't like the leader, what can the CIA do?
Kill them.
Fund them, give them weapons, and give them training. And when it starts, you help them too, right? So in 1953, we overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh and put in the Shah of Iran. So now we've got the Soviets hemmed in on their southern periphery in the Middle East. Now, remember I said that the Cold War is one of the main players in the current terrorism issues? Well, what's going to happen, I'll jump forward and we'll talk about this again. The Shah was not a popular guy. A lot of like death squads and stuff. He's pro-American, but internally the people didn't love him. In 1978, there was a revolution, an Islamic revolution. In 1979, there was an Islamic revolution, and they overthrew the Shah of Iran. And he fled, and he was sick. And America said that we would take him in and give him treatments. And we did that. They invaded our embassy. So now, we're seen as the person who put in the Shah, and now we're protecting the Shah. They came into our embassy, they kept many of our hostages, and today Iran is one of our biggest enemies. We don't even have any diplomats there, right? We haven't talked to officially Iran since 1979. And a lot of it comes from this. Iran also funds terrorists. Have you ever heard of a group called Hezbollah before? Iran is a main funder of Hezbollah. During the Iraq-Iran War in 1988, we actually traded with Iran illegally. This is one of the things Reagan's getting in trouble for. So a lot of this lack of stability is a result of our attempt to stabilize it against the Soviet Union in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Another example is going to be in Egypt. In Egypt, the Suez Canal, which is also on this map, the Suez Canal was actually constructed in the 19th century when the British and the French were colonial powers in the area. And a guy named Gamal Nasser was the president of Egypt. He was also what you might call an Arab nationalist, which means he believed in the nationalist movement of Arabs. Also, from world history, do you remember what was happening in the 50s and 60s in Africa, specifically Northern Africa, but in Africa in general? Do you remember? countries were getting their independence, right? Like in Algeria, in Libya, they were getting their independence from European nations. And now Nasser is going to do that, and what he's going to do is he's going to take the Suez Canal. He's going to nationalize the Suez Canal, make it Egyptian. It was owned by Britain and France, now it's going to be owned by Egypt. So now, there's this showdown. Britain and France, by the way, who do you think Egypt was being messed with?
Soviets.
Soviet Union, right? So now there's this showdown. The British and the French want the Americans to go to war and take back the Suez Canal. Now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. I want you to consider the symbolism of what we're talking about here, right? Britain and France want America to come in and help take back the Suez Canal. Eisenhower goes and he said, well, I don't think I'm going to go to war over the Suez Canal. So Britain and France, you're not going to do anything. This just happened. You're going to have to be okay with it. And Britain and France said, okay. Now, they protested. They hated it. But in the end, what is the symbolism of what just happened?
America just told them what to do.
Britain and France had been the two biggest powers in the world for how long? 400 years? 300 years? America was an upstart nothing forever. And now we just looked at Britain and France and said, first of all, they asked for our help, right?
Yeah.
Second of all, we told them no. Third of all, we told them to stop complaining, and they did. This is symbolic of the transition of power between powers and superpowers, right? There's a difference, and it's just been symbolized. Eisenhower decided it's not worth a fight. It's not worth a war. Now, Hungary and now the Suez Canal, both of them, Eisenhower decided not to deploy the idea of massive retaliation and getting into some war that he didn't care to bring a war into. And why is Eisenhower particularly able to do this when another president, like say Obama, might not be able to do something like this?
He was a war hero, so he knew what would happen.
He, not only was he a war hero and he knew what was going to happen, but people couldn't question him, right? Well, Eisenhower, this is military stuff. You don't even know what you're talking about. Who's going to say that? A nobody. Oftentimes, and this is a big deal, and we don't see this, but a lot of times what happens in White Houses, and I know it happened to Clinton a lot, and with Bush it was different, but it also happened. When 3- and 4-star generals show up in your Oval Office, that even if you're the president, that can be intimidating. Right? You're talking about guys who have been in it. And guys who are really smart. They know what they're talking about. For Clinton, who didn't have any military experience, he was never very comfortable. For Bush, who didn't really have any military experience, but he was always so pro-military, he never asked any hard questions, right? Clinton was always uncomfortable being around military guys at first. But anyway. For the first couple of years, Bush kind of revered some of them, so he wasn't pushing them hard. When these guys walked into Eisenhower's Oval Office, he was used to being their boss already, right? He already knew all of them. And when they walked in, you know how long these generals had been calling Eisenhower sir? All their life. This was nothing new. When they walked into Clinton's office, calling him sir wasn't easy to do for some 4-star generals. Colin Powell and Clinton did not get along that well. But and Obama, the same way, Obama did not have any military record. So for a lot of 4 or 5, or not 5 star generals, but like 3- and 4-star generals who walk in the Oval Office, you know, Obama had just been a guy and now he's their boss. But with Eisenhower, he had always been their boss. And this is why in a world like this, Eisenhower can say, let's not do this and still not lose a lot of political ground. Does that make sense?
So do you think that the best presidents are often war generals for that reason? Or?
No, I don't think so, because I think Eisenhower is actually unique, because most generals oftentimes are eager to use the military, right? But he had so much power, and he was really good at knowing when to employ power and when not to. He was patient. He wasn't a warmonger. I mean, there are some generals who just like to go to war, right? If MacArthur was president, we'd have gone to war every 25 minutes. But Eisenhower wasn't like that, and that's important. Also, we've had a lot of generals who have been president, but never in an era where America had this much power. Now the presidents, like since Eisenhower, I mean Truman was in the military in World War I, FDR was a Navy guy, so having a military background especially wasn't uncommon for like Kennedy and Nixon and Johnson, because what had all these guys done? They'd all fought in World War II, right? Kennedy World War II, Nixon World War II, LBJ World War II, Ford World War II. Carter was in World War II, but he was in the military. Like I told you, he got his degree from Annapolis in nuclear engineering. Reagan was kind of in the military. He was like he's like an entertainer for the military, right? George Bush, the first George Bush, was a combat pilot during World War II. So these guys knew the military pretty well, but none of them had been like general.
And like, didn't you also say like,
First Bush was actually shot down. He was a war hero. Yeah.
wow.
His life is considerably more impressive than his son's life. And that was one thing that people kind of. I mean, the first George Bush, he came from money. I mean, the Bushes are a very wealthy family. In fact, their name are Bush Walker. The Walker family in the North is a really big deal. The Bushes are from Connecticut. They're not a Texas family. And there's a lot of money there. His grandfather had been in the Senate. But Bush had made a lot more money. Bush had been a congressman. Bush had been head of the CIA. In fact, if you go to the CIA, it's the George Herbert Walker CIA building in Langley. He had been vice president, and he had some business acumen. And he had been a war hero. The second George Bush didn't really have that, right? It was seen like most of the stuff he got because his dads really gave it to him. So people didn't respect him as much. Now, he was a really good politician in the sense that he understood politics better. The second George Bush understood people way more. The first George Bush he really didn't like evangelicals. He did not like religious people who were always trying to tell him what to do. Second George Bush was really at home with that. That really helped. I'm sorry. Go ahead, question. Go ahead.
Oh, not really.
Okay. Well, what else? So Eisenhower, Pat, he actually presents this idea. And it's going to be focused in the Middle East. And it's going to become known as the Eisenhower Doctrine. Everybody has to get to doctrine.
Why? Why are they called doctrines?
Because this is a foreign policy direction that we decide to follow. Right?
Eisenhower proclamation.
Well, we have a Truman Doctrine. We're going to have an Eisenhower Doctrine. We don't have a Kennedy Doctrine, really. Or Nixon one. Although Nixon has a really cool thing he does. It's really neat. We actually do have a Powell, Colin Powell has the Powell Doctrine. The Powell Doctrine actually comes from Vietnam. In fact, we won this war. Powell's Doctrine, the first Iraq War, says this: America should never go to war unless you have all three things in play. Number one, you have so many more people and troops and weapons and technology that you're going to overwhelm your enemy. Number two, you know exactly what victory looks like. And number three, you know how you're going to get out, win, and what it's going to look like. And if you don't know those three things, then you don't go to war. And that's why in the Iraq War we're just sort of pulling out of now, he did not really go for it because we did not use as many troops as he thought. In fact, he and the head of the Army, a guy named Eric Shinseki, who's now Obama's head of the VA, they both said we need to go in with 400 to 450,000 troops. And Bush and the Secretary of Defense did not want that many people. They thought it would have been, America wouldn't have gone for that. So they went in with about 150,000 troops. Now we were able to beat Iraq really quickly, but what was the problem? The afterwards, right? We didn't know what victory looked like. We didn't know how we were going to get out. We didn't know any of those things. And what Powell calls it, he calls it the Pier 1 idea. That if you break it, you bought it, right? And so we broke Iraq, and now we got to deal with all this stuff. And we did not follow the Powell Doctrine. In this Gulf War we did, and we won quickly. We got out, we got what we wanted, right? So if you're ever a commanding officer, or if you're ever president, you should follow that. The Powell Doctrine. The Eisenhower Doctrine was also at the Middle East. The Eisenhower Doctrine said we're going to extend economic and military aid to any nations in the Middle East who are threatened by communism. So if any of these countries are threatened by communism, you will have our full support. Remember, the Truman Doctrine was that kind of the same thing within Europe, right? Specifically Greece and Turkey. Eisenhower sort of extending that now to the Middle East. The Middle East is going to become more and more and more strategically important. and obviously in the last 20 years has been very, very important. I think it's going to start becoming less important strategically because America is getting an oil supply, an energy supply, and we're not using the Middle East that much for oil. But Iran is becoming a nuclear threat. All right, let's talk about Cuba. Now, I'm a really good artist. Again, better than all of you guys. I'm going to draw Cuba.
I don't know. My picture of Mary was pretty impressive.
That is a good picture, Mary. Birdie Soup, how many minutes are on that thing?
15.
You stop it and stop.